Hey guys, what's going on? We're at episode 98 of FISHTORY, so thank you so much for making that happen. Episode 98 in a new week. Welcome. Hope you're doing well. If you want to become a member, I do FISHTORY every single week. We do 4 episodes at least, and they're anywhere from 3 to 12 minutes if I'm feeling real foxy, news about fish. So I did a story about episode 20 or so 80 episodes ago now, and we talked about a small town in Texas called Texarkana, and there was a strange phenomena where frogs and mostly fish just fell from the sky. And everyone said, you know, this happens. This has historically happened, and it was a water spout that sucked up one of the cattle ponds that was probably stocked with bass and small fish for fishing, as well as maybe the food for the bass, some sort of minnows and things. And all it takes is a small tornado or water spout to pick up that water and all the fish in it, in these ponds in rural Texas, and dump it on Texarkana, which is right on the border of Louisiana and East Texas. I actually have family down there. So they thought that they knew what it was, but there was a problem that meteorologists saw, and that was there were no hooked echoes or even rain clouds right in the spot where it happened at the time that it happened. And a hooked echo is a telltale sign for any sizable tornado, any categorized level tornado, which you would probably need to pick up any sort of fish and dump them for, I think it was 1.5 miles of fish in this town. So it threw them a considerable distance, or did it? So interestingly enough, there is a new article being published out of the UK by a US researcher, meteorologist, who said that she thinks it's birds. So there is a species of birds, if you're in the US, you may be familiar with it, UK too, and parts of Europe, but it's called the cormorant, and it is a large-bodied bird, black bird, and it eats fish predominantly. It's kind of like a heron, like a great blue heron or gray heron, lesser heron. You get the picture. It's like a pelican, essentially. And it's thought that perhaps when they flew over the airport, they had a close call with a small plane. Now, these birds are known to regurgitate their meals so that they can fly faster. And a lot of times what they'll do is they'll sit around certain times a year, including this time of year that this happened in, and they will eat and eat and eat and eat until their bellies are super full, and then they'll take off and fly even though they're heavy, and they'll just kind of cruise but with some work. They'll try to catch air currents as the day warms up, and then head up the Mississippi River predominantly, but also other rivers that are tributaries. And the hypothesis is that they got startled by a plane. Now, other researchers say that in the peer review that this isn't necessarily a surefire thing, because they've been noted to do this when scared on the ground. They throw up before taking off. They also do it sometimes if like hail starts or something, like some bad weather starts. They've been known to get startled, or thunderstorms, and to do it from nervousness seemingly, which yet again probably goes back to the idea that then they can fly faster. So wherever they need to get to cover, you know, if they need to get to a tree limb or under a tree canopy, they can hurry up and do so. But it's not really known exactly why they do it, other than the guess of nervousness, really. But there may be other situations in which they do it. So it's thought that either them or pelicans could have done this in the volume that it was done. And there's actually signs of some of the fish being partially digested in some of the photos, which is really interesting too. initially, it was thought that they could have been battered by hail or something else, but now when looking at it closer, it does resemble digestion to a lot of people who were asked blindly, you know, what would cause this in a fish found on the ground. And the first answer was generally being that a bird dropped it after kind of gnawing on it and or it being in their stomach for a while. I guess they have fairly weak stomachs as far as the first portion, especially if they've been eating a lot of fish and a lot of water. It kind of neutralizes their stomach, and it can kind of not necessarily break the fish down immediately. So it could be that they were feeding for an hour and there could be a couple hundred of them, and then all of a sudden they take off, plane scares them, and they regurgitate. That's the theory anyways. What do you guys think? I just thought it was a cool follow-up that somebody actually published a scholarly journal about this, and even weirder that I managed to find it, because it was in a really, like, kind of fringe journal that does stuff about, like, UFOs and other things where there's not really a lot of proof, but just kind of speculative science based on hard science, but pretty darn speculative sometimes. You know, what would Bigfoot be if he existed? That kind of article, you know, talking about the evolution of creatures, which that's all fine, and it's fun, and I think that's the nature of this journal, but it's just not really heralded as a big journal for revelations that end up being proven later as consented to by the rest of the scientific community. Let's put it that way. But needless to say, it is on the table just as likely as water spouts now for something that could happen. Same with pelicans in other parts of the world, and even there in Texas there are pelicans, although it's unlikely that that many, I guess that time of year, would have been around there. And one more little piece of evidence that I thought for those skeptics out there is that there was a note of cormorants at the airport that day, 20 minutes prior to this event happening, and it was mentioned, be careful, there's a lot of them out here today, beware of bird strikes, which can take down a plane. So, what do you guys think? I don't know. Back to you. This has been Alex Williamson with FISHTORY on the Aquatic Morning Show also. And back to you, Jess. Have a good one, guys. I'll talk to you later. I hope you guys are all doing well in the chat. Bye. Hey guys, what is going on? We are at episode 99 of FISHTORY, and today we're going to talk about something that you guys may have already heard about, and that is the largest freshwater creature fish ever caught, and it's pretty exciting news. So, there were fishermen in the Stung Treng region of northern Cambodia, and on June 13th of this year, they hauled in the largest ever fish to be recorded officially. The female giant freshwater stingray, or Urogymnus polypus, man, that's hard to say, weighed approximately 300 kilos, or rather 661 pounds, which is the same weight of a typical grizzly bear. And the large disc, you know, they're a stingray, so they're a large disc-shaped creature, and this one happened to be extremely long. So the phenomenal fish, also known as the Cambodian Whip Ray, spanned 2.2 meters, which is 7 feet across, meaning that if it were placed on a ping pong table, its outer wings would hang over each side by over 30 centimeters or a foot on each side. And the record-breaking ray is part of a very endangered species. And in Cambodia, the name of this species is the borami, which is roughly translated into the full moon fish, or the full moon ray, in the Khmer language. Pretty obvious why. It's a giant disc-shaped fish. So, fishermen in Cambodia have told stories of up to 1,000-pound rays, or 500 kilograms, but they've never been able to really support these claims with actual evidence. However, there was a United States team on site this time, and they were able to tag a ray that was the largest ever found just this month. So this isn't the first record breaker, though, from this river. Now, the Mekong is a really amazing river, and it holds some really interesting records for large creatures. So previously, just several years ago, the founder of this Hunting for Giants project with freshwater fish, Zeb Hogan, who's an ichthyologist, you might have seen him on like Animal Planet or Discovery Channel, or I think he had a show on National Geographic as well, National Geographic Channel. But he kind of did giant river, not river monsters, but giant river fish and giant lake fish, like Hunting for Giants, I think, is something along the lines of the theme. But along this same river, only several years ago, they found the Mekong giant catfish, which at the time was being heralded as the largest fish. Since 2005, it had held the record, which was 293 kilograms or 646 pounds and 8 feet 11 inches long from head to tail. Now, the Mekong giant catfish and the giant freshwater stingray are now actually technically sharing the record for largest freshwater fish, because it's too close to call when they're only a few pounds apart in weight, and the myths and the records say that they were once much larger, maybe even double the size of this. It's too hard to call a winner yet, so to speak. However, there was another former contender, the Chinese paddlefish, or the Siphoris gladius, which once was in the Yangtze River, which is also in Asia, in China, and it had a confirmed length of 3 meters, which is 9 feet 10 inches, and it weighed 300 kilograms or 661 pounds, same exact thing as same exact weight as this current record. Unfortunately, these fish are extinct now. There are records and there are photos of ancient paddlefish that could have been several hundred years old that used to live in the river, caught in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and some were reported to be 23 feet long and weighing up to 950 pounds. However, the largest photo evidence seems to be around an 18-foot long one, but that would firmly give it the record. But in 2020, they officially declared the species extinct, and it probably died out sometime between 2005 and 2010 due to overfishing and habitat loss. So now the record will go to one of these two fish, most likely. And they didn't just catch it to eat or to keep or sell or anything. They put an acoustic tag on it and then let it go. And the scientists are hoping to figure out where it spawns and what it does, because it's still a mystery in the murky river that's so muddy and hard to see that they really don't know how exactly they spawn or how old they get or what their migrations look like. And so Dr. Zeb Hogan is going to be following up this project. So they don't know if they're a fish that hangs out in the same mile stretch of the river or one that goes all the way to the saltwater, for all they know. So it'll be really interesting to see the results of that. But this is Alex Williamson, and this is also FISHTORY. I'll talk to you next time. Have a good one, everybody, and have a good one, Jess. I'll see you soon. Bye. Hey guys, what is going on? We are at episode 100 of FISHTORY. So that means you guys have made it a possibility, a reality, a dream come true. 100 episodes. So I've been having fun with this series, and I'm glad you guys seem to enjoy it too, especially if you're watching this, you can hear this. I try to make these audio based, so usually there's pictures in the community post for members, if there's applicable pictures, but I like to make them audio based so folks can listen in their car or podcast style. Anyways, thank you so much for making 100 episodes possible. Thank you to Jess for suggesting this cooperation and teamwork with our channels. And let's talk about the story of the century, or at least of 100 stories, which is the Dojo Loach, the weather loach, the Japanese pond loach, and how incredibly invasive it is. So right now, it is thought that the Dojo Loach exists for sure in 10 different countries outside of its natural range, including the Philippines, Turkmenistan, Italy, Spain, Germany, France, Austria, the United States, Mexico, and Canada. Kind of crazy. So the populations have been described off and on since 1950, with the first loaches reportedly found in Idaho, oddly enough, in 1951 in the Boise River. Now they can catch 300, 400 at a time when they put out nets and traps, which are basically minnow nets designed to entice them with little micro crustaceans and insects and things as bait. But they didn't really know what this meant. I mean, they also exist in Hawaii, so this is quite the range, from the Eurasian steppe to Spain and the deserts of Spain, to the desert of Idaho, all the way into the Rocky Mountains, into Lake Michigan. They're in over 15 states for sure that they've been considered established in, and it doesn't look like they're going to be stopped anytime soon. In California, they've been spreading through the Central Valley through irrigation, drainage ditches and things that are used for crop irrigation. So everywhere from Bakersfield all the way up to Sacramento, they're found all over the place now. And it's not really known what the impact will be or is of these fish. It's thought that obviously they're causing competition for the food that they eat, in that they can eat quite a bit of it. However, it's also thought that they eat a ton of mosquitoes. About 25.6% of their food was either mosquitoes or midges and other little insects in that category when they've cut them up and averaged around the United States what they've been eating. Now, they also eat microcrustacean and algae. Algae only seems to make up about 10% of what they eat, and it's from when they are kind of desperate, it looks like, maybe for some vitamins as well. But it's really important to figure out what the constraints are for this species, and they've now kind of figured it out, and it is rather startling. So, I mean, they're in the Boise River, they're in the San Joaquin River, they're in Ohio. You know, realistically, they're probably in every state. I would really recommend that folks go out with a net, especially at night, and when they come into the shallows, go out with a dip net or some sort of crayfish trap that's got fine mesh around it, and like a small shrimp trap, and go set it and see if these are in your area. I'm very curious to see if anybody else has these readily available that's listening to this. But the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service was shocked when this study that I'm going to tell you about in a moment was completed, because they first pulled a single weather loach out of a river, the San Joaquin River, in 2012. And so then they explored the river further that year. They found 6 of the fish after having a team of 50 search for 12 days. And they thought, okay, this isn't that big of a deal. Well, in 2015, they pulled out 300 fish. In 2018, they pulled out 5,000 fish along the river. So, kind of a problem. Well, it makes sense why it's a problem, because now they've realized that this thing can survive from Siberia to Vietnam in its native range, and it has kind of erratic behavior when the barometer changes. So you'll see them come up and surface and blow bubbles and kind of like almost make the water look like it's boiling. And so that's what gave them the name weather loaches. But they are a very interesting fish in that they do that weird surface thing, yet they spend a lot of their time buried in the mud and just kind of waiting for little larvae and insects to cross their path, and then they'll snap them up. It's also thought that they're learning to eat other things in new parts of their territory, and luckily they do have smallish mouths, but female weather loaches tend to produce 2,000 viable eggs every time they spawn, and they can spawn 4 times a year, with the average spawning 2.5 times in several studies in several states. Now, they are also able to survive really extreme conditions, because if the body of water dries up, they can bury themselves in mud, and as long as they have a layer of mucus, they can survive 81 days without food and taking air through their mouth, just living in mud. This is close to a record with some of the other catfish and carp in the world. And it's an incredible fish for that sake, but it does prey on the eggs of other fish, and so it's a problem for that reason. It's also a problem because it can increase the ammonia, the nitrates and nitrite level, as well as kick up the mud in these bodies of water where it lives. Now, the study that I was going to tell you about was done by the University of Boise, and they took 42 weather loaches and they put them into a chamber, and they put the ambient air temperature in the chamber to 0 Celsius or 32 degrees. They let it sit for a week. When they were done with that, every single loach survived. It had ice over the water in the tank, and there was liquid underneath there. It had been isolated. So then they wanted to ask themselves, well, what about in a flowing river? How are these things surviving? So then they kicked it up a notch. They had churning aerators in the water, and they put 42 more I don't know why 42, but okay, so they put 42 loaches again, and only 2 of them died when they brought it down to 25 Fahrenheit, or around -3 Celsius. So they're pretty hardcore at surviving. I mean, it's not going to get below freezing in most lakes. They're going to go into the mud, and then they'll be fine for up to 81 days with 0 food, let alone the fact that they can eat worms, grubs, algae, other stuff that's at the bottom of lakes and rivers. The fact that they're surviving in the Boise River and the Snake River in Idaho shows us that they actually can withstand even colder than freezing water and seem to do fine. They must have a natural antifreeze, and so it's going to be studied, because it is up there with some of the Arctic fish, believe it or not. This fish that can be found in the tropics can also withstand Arctic temperatures. It seems like it's poised to take over just about any habitat that it can encounter. And with the record in the lab being 18,000 viable eggs, I remember I said 2,000 was the average, but 18,000 in one fish, this thing can really, really spread quickly. So keep an eye out for weather loaches. Definitely do not put them in your local water sources. And I guess say hello to our new neighbors. Hope you guys are having a good week, and I'll talk to you on the other side of 100 episodes. Take care, and thanks again, everybody. Back to you at the Aquatic Morning Show, guys. Bye. Hey guys, what is going on? It's Alex Williamson, and we are on Friday's episode of FISHTORY. So, on the theme of invasive species of fish, I thought we would talk about an interesting study out of Montreal. So, they did a study there with ichthyologists and statisticians and the mathematicians of the university and the biology department. And what they did is they basically figured out how many individual fish in the St. Lawrence Seaway or in the city of Montreal. So, okay, let me step back. So first what they did was they figured out how many miles of coastline were urban or suburban with pet owners. And so then they figured out by going to pet stores and asking people straight up, and anonymously, by the way, they asked them, have you ever dumped fish after keeping them? And the answer from 28% was yes. And that's a bummer, for one. But this is coming out of large pet stores, too. So this is first-time pet owners. This is big time fish keepers. This is people with it's everybody. And they surveyed these people, and this is Canada, by the way, too. So it may be different elsewhere. But they then said, well, how many of you have dumped more than one fish into a waterway just to get rid of it when you're either tired of it? And they did a whole survey about why they did it and those sort of things too. But they determined that essentially 7% of the fish keeping population on an annual basis releases fish into bodies of water. Now that sounds really awful, and it is. However, most of them said they did so hoping that the fish would live for a few months in summer and then just die slowly. I guess they thought that would be the natural thing to do, seemed to be the main answer. But, you know, like they would get cold and then that would be the end of them. However, that's not the case with certain species. And so what they did is they figured out with all the miles of coastline with populations in these urban areas around large freshwater bodies of water, they then figured out how many of each species was sold in the hobby and found the top 50 most popular fish sold by talking to importers, store owners. I think in Montreal alone they talked to 81 store owners, importers, and sellers of fish. And then they talked to the fish keepers, and they found that number of 7%. So every fish has a threshold, basically, and it changes on the environment, it changes on food supplies, the health of the fish, the species of the fish, how many eggs they have, when they lay eggs, when they spawn, if they're live bears, you know, all these different things. But every fish species has what they call a proliferation quotient. And the proliferation quotient is essentially how many of these fish need to be released into a given waterway that could plausibly travel far enough and find each other. So, I mean, you could release a guppy in Detroit and a guppy in Montreal, and they'll probably never see each other, even if they do survive the summer in the top water of the waterway. So they found that basically only 6 species in the hobby were a threat in the north. Miami, pretty much every species was viable. However, when you get to Georgia, it's cut down to something like 30 or 40 species, and when you get north of kind of Georgia, Texas, Mississippi, Alabama, the deep south basically, and the frost line, when you get to areas where it freezes annually, all of a sudden it wipes out all but, I believe they said 20 of 5,000 species they considered common in the hobby. Now, when they figured all of that out, this is a big sweeping study to try to figure out legislation in Canada, they figured out which ones were the biggest threats. And they found that if everybody in Canada followed the pattern of 7% of fish owners putting fish in the water, and the type of fish they owned were surveyed, they said that, you know, the average of how many fish would be going into the Great Lakes, for instance, how many goldfish would be like 500 a year or so, how many guppies would be around 500 to 600 a year, platies, another 500 or 600. Neon tetras, another 500 to 600. Mollies, zebra danios, swordtails, and bettas. Now, what gets interesting is when they talk about things like goldfish. So goldfish can survive the winter, and they're already known to be in the Great Lakes. The wild form of the carp and the koi, and the goldfish species that have basically gone back to being feral, both exist with domestic traits in a lot of waterways, and that's been known for a long time. In fact, 1840 was the first time that somebody complained about there being goldfish in the waterways of the St. Lawrence River, which is 30 years before goldfish are even mentioned being imported by most sources. Or if you Google it, like, supposedly there weren't goldfish here at that time. Yet there's other sources in text, multiple within a 10-year period, but one as early as 1840, mentioning, hey, there's goldfish in the little runoff areas and ponds and things that are fed by the St. Lawrence River. Pretty astounding information. And, you know, to be honest, maybe people were closer to the land back then. Maybe they knew more what was going on with the river on their property, the waterway, the fish, catching things, subsisting off of things. So they then figured out that the real fish that was the issue that's not already established in these waterways is the white cloud minnow. And the white cloud minnow can survive down to around 5 degrees Celsius. It can withstand freezing temperatures under the ice in deep bodies of water. And they figure that about 117 to 122 are released every year by their math, which, I mean, you could argue with it all day, with the way they did the collection of information, the answers, and even how they counted what species are included and so forth. But it was an interesting study because even by this very liberal assessment, in the sense that, like, they assumed the worst for everything. They talked to the biologists and ichthyologists, said, how cold can they survive? And then they gave it a little bit of wiggle room. And then, you know, they said, how many need to be in a body of water to multiply? How many eggs do they have? How many live births do they give? Whatever it may be. And then they figured out the number of fish that would need to be released into the Great Lakes and tried to figure out what species in the hobby could be a problem theoretically. If everybody went, you know, one day and released them all in the shore or in the same area, the same bay, which fish could be a species? And basically it came down to goldfish, koi, weather loaches, a number of like goodyead species also, and then flagfish, least killifish, and the big one is obviously dojo loaches that they worry about and that are already there, And the one that the U.S. doesn't really seem to worry about, nor have we really had a ton of reports of it establishing, is the mountain minnow, which happens to be extinct in its native range, basically. So, kind of interesting that even in this study, only one species was deemed really a possible threat to the northern waterways of the Great Lakes and connecting bodies of water. Down in the deep south, it's a very different story. But I found that very interesting, and even in Canada's assessment, which, like I said, it's pretty liberal and gives a lot of hypothetical leeway, using biologists and statisticians, kind of this combined effort that I've never seen such a thorough workup of this info. And they go down and they give you a list, which is kind of interesting to look at because, you know, after the first 10, they've got tiger barbs, plecostomus, cully loaches, cardinal tetras, corridoras, angelfish, black neon tetras, harlequin rasboras, white cloud minnows. So they come in pretty high on the list. Dwarf gouramis, Chinese algae eaters, Siamese algae eaters, Norman's lamp-eye killies, clown loaches, lemon tetras, silver-tip tetras, black phantom tetras, bloodfin tetras, black-line penguin fish, jewel tetras, golden autocinclus, which I don't know why they're calling them that, but it's just your common autocinclus. And then the firehead tetra, which we call the Serpa tetra. So, in any case, odd some of the names that are used, maybe just different trade names in Montreal and Quebec, which do speak French also. So, interesting study, though, and I think it's evidence for us not to worry about most of the species, honestly. Even if most aquarium keepers were as neglectful as this says, and I don't quite buy that. But I'm curious what your take is, and if you have any thoughts on this. So that's the news this week. That's the amazing new and improved all-in-one use utility news from FISHTORY. I'll talk to you guys next week. Have a good one. Bye.